Hello, my bookish darlings. If you've been following me, you know I love book covers. And I've done some comparison battles between the US and UK. And I've done one on the US versus Israel, thanks to Moon Books, my marvelous follower and friend from Israel, who sent me a batch of covers, and we had a lot of fun comparing them to their US counterparts. Now, she has sent me another batch. So this is part 2 of the battle between Israel and US book covers. Who is going to win? If you think you know, let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, go ahead and like this video and subscribe to my channel. First up is one of my favorites, Isaac Asimov, I, Robot. We have 2 red covers. The USA version has sort of a background you can kind of see through. It's like transparent to some robots. And then there's a cut in, I guess, of the same picture that's much clearer. And iRobot is tiny, tiny print on the bottom. And Isaac Asimov is big on the top because he's the headliner. The Israeli version, I guess it's a robot. It looks almost Art Deco, but it looks like he's wearing a top hat, which is kind of throwing me. I think I'm going to have to give it to the USA. Next up is Richard Osman's The Thursday Murder Club. And I have not read this book. I don't know anything about it. I assume it's going to be a mystery. Whether a cozy mystery or something else, I don't know, but let's look at the covers. The USA version has sort of a red border, looks like there's a fox, but mostly the feature is the font Richard Osman in big print and the Thursday Murder Club, which is kind of an interesting font. Now, if you know me, I prefer a more illustrated cover than just featuring the text, which brings us to the Israeli cover. Now, I should have said this earlier, but full disclosure, I don't know Hebrew, so I'm not going to be able to read any of the text on the Israeli side, but I think we get a gist of what's going on here. There's an old woman with a gun. I think she's dressed in black, maybe in mourning, but she has this expression on her face. Oh my God, I love this cover. Absolutely love this cover. I want to know what's going on with this little old lady with a gun. So we're going to give this one to Israel. Next we have another one of my favorites, Douglas Adams' The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which is sort of an absurd, almost a parody or satire of science fiction novels. It's been adapted into a BBC series and a couple of movies, I believe. But I'm well familiar with the USA version. We have a background of colorful stars. It looks like the font is sort of that neon retro restaurant font, the restaurant at the end of the universe. And then we have a little planet that looks like a smiley face or some type of face just going, yeah, 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 yeah. I love this book so much, but let's look at the Israel side. I was not expecting this as the main image on the cover, but it is a cow or a space bovine that's sort of cut up into different parts, which is a scene in the novel where your dinner comes to you sentient and alive, but of course, sort of resigned and expecting to give their life for the pleasure of your meal. Anyway, very absurd. And I like the Israel side. I like this cartoon cow just sort of offering herself up. She looks very blasé about it. There's some flowers, and then she's cut up into brisket and flank, and I love that cover. Okay, we are going to give it to Israel. Next up is Victoria Aveyard, the Red Queen. Now, I think I've heard of this, but I have not read it. The USA version has this upside down crown dripping blood. And it says, "Power is a dangerous game." I like the cover. I don't love the cover. It's not that illustrated, but I do like the crown, and that dripping blood makes it very intriguing. I wonder if it's a horror. On the other side, Israel. Now, I didn't get this in the USA version, but in the Israel version, it looks like a fantasy, or it's obviously a fantasy, because we have these two hands holding some magic. But also it looks contemporary. The hair that you just see peeking out of the sides looks like from a contemporary person, and that red doesn't look medieval. Nothing about this gives me sort of the traditional fantasy setting of that medieval Europe type thing, whereas the USA version does, which makes me wonder what the heck this book is about. But for me, I prefer the illustrated Israel version. I feel like I at least know there's going to be magic. I'm looking at these two covers, I'm very confused as to the setting, but at this point, one would imagine you'd be reading the blurb and finding out. But I'm giving this to Israel. Israel is ahead 3-1. What is going on? Last time we did this, I believe the USA won. But let's take a look at the next one, which is Emil and the Detectives by Eric Kastner. Interesting. I assume this is a middle grade or maybe even a chapter book. It says Red Fox Classics. I don't know this one. Kind of reminds me, I guess, of Encyclopedia Brown, because there's a young person and they're detectives. Anyway, the USA version looks very, very retro. The illustrations are retro, the font is. It kind of reminds me of some of those Roald Dahl books. I like it. It's okay. There's nothing in it that really pops out because it's just a little boy, someone on a bicycle. And I guess it's one of those newsboy kids with one of those horns that, not Groucho, Harpo Marx would use.
You know, I'd be lost without a telephone.
The Israel version looks more contemporary. Like I said, I don't read Hebrew, but I like that font that's kind of wavy. I don't know what's going on with it, but it looks interesting. But the illustration is totally different from the USA version. There's saturated colors. There's just one little figure moving down a street, and it looks like there's someone following them behind a column. It's interesting. I am not a huge fan of either of those covers. I doubt if I would pick this book up based on the cover, but of these two, I'm gonna have to give it again to Israel. It pops a lot more, I think, than the USA version. And the USA version, of course, since I said retro, it looks very, very dated. Whereas the Israel version almost makes me think of one of those old cartoon books, those Gary Larson books. So Israel again, what is going on? Next we have The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. And of course I have heard of this, I have not read it myself. The USA version is a cover I'm familiar with. There's sort of this teal background, and then there's this ancient Greek helmet. I think it's okay, the cover. I like the font in The Song for Achilles. It doesn't really wow me, but it's a decent cover. The Israel version, what is going on? You don't get anything that this is sort of Greek or Roman. You just see the eye of the face peeking through a fig bush, and there's this big purple fig in front. Maybe that has something to do with the story. I don't know. I don't like it. I don't know what's going on. I'm going to have to give this one to the USA. The next one, oh my gosh. I have to tell you, I was a huge fan of Dr. Dolittle when I was young. And I had very fond memories of reading a lot of the Dr. Dolittle books. And by the way, you don't have to pay for them. They're all free on Project Gutenberg. And for, I think, a reading challenge, for some booktube challenge, I went back and I read a Dr. Dolittle book. Let me tell you, they are so racist. I was embarrassed that I used to be a big fan. I hope I read an abridged version, but man, reading the original is eye-opening. Even the illustrations were really racist. But we're just going to look at the covers. The USA version has a picture of Dr. Dolittle in a jungle speaking to the animals. I actually like this illustration. I mean, it looks very dated for the style of illustration, but there's a lot going on. This is a type of illustration you can just get lost looking at all the details, all the different simians and antelopes and parrots. And I know if I was a kid, this is the type of drawing I would be drawn to and get lost in. The Israel version, on the other hand, is very cartoony. We see Dr. Dolittle giving an eye exam to a horse wearing glasses, which is very funny. But I'm going to have to give this one to the USA. I just like that illustration so much more. But what I don't like is the actual story of Dr. Dolittle. I would recommend you stay away from it unless you're doing some research or curious, and then go to Project Gutenberg and read the original unabridged version. Next we have The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Other Clinical Stories by Oliver Sacks. I've actually never read this book, but I've heard about it. I believe the author is some brain surgeon or neuroscientist who recounts some really wild stories of the human mind that may have had some type of traumatic incident, like a man mistaking his hat for a wife. I heard this is a very good book, and I'm glad I'm actually seeing it because it reminds me to actually check it out. Anyway, the USA version has, the background is yellow, almost goldenrod, sort of on the orange side, and there's two color schemes. There's sort of this turquoisey blue and a burnt orange. It's interesting. I think it's interesting. We see a hat. I think the selling point of this novel is actually the title, because it's just so funny, but it's okay. The Israel version actually has a woman on the man's hat. So we get the man, and we get the wife, and we get the hat. So all that's going on there. Now, I think if you're like a graphic designer, you would definitely say the USA version, but I'm just looking at the illustration. I love the illustration in the Israel version. It's charming. I think I'm going to give this to Israel. Okay, well, we've gone through 8 books. 5 have been Israel, 3 have been the USA, and we only have 2 books left. So this could either end in a tie, or Israel's going to take it. The next book is The Vampire Diaries, The Awakening by L.J. Smith. I believe this is young adult supernatural. I haven't read it. This isn't a book I'm really drawn to, but we're just looking at the covers. The USA version has a woman featured on the cover. There's a moon in the background, and it's kind of indistinct of what else is around her, although I see some feathers, which I assume are quills of a pen, and maybe a gravestone. It screams paranormal romance, so you know what you're getting into. The Israeli side, on the other hand, is completely different. There's sort of this interesting font with this scroll in it, which I kind of like, and it just has a, assume, man's face or a person's face with a bit of blood on it, and he's very brooding and very attractive, and I like the darkness around him. I prefer the Israel version. I really, really do. The USA version is just too that hokey paranormal YA thing. But the Israel one, I'm really drawn into that hypnotic stare of this ancient vampire, perhaps. Okay, at this point, you know Israel has won. So let's go ahead and look at the very last selection. And for our final selection, it is My Father Always Embarrasses Me by Meyer Shalev and Yossi Abulafia. Looking at the USA version, I like that illustration. I love the father in the kitchen. He has a whisk in his mouth and he's stirring something up and all the cabinets are open. I love that illustration. The Israeli version has a father on a bicycle with the son, and he's holding, I don't know what he's holding. Looks like bread or a tambourine or something, but the son's expression on his face, you can tell he is totally embarrassed. And people are looking at the father. The father doesn't care. He's having a great time. I love that father. Of these two covers, even though I prefer the USA illustration, I like the artwork better, but I'm getting more of a story from the Israel version. And I think this is probably going to be a picture book. I'm getting that vibe from it. Maybe it's a chapter book, but I think it's a picture book. And I think it looks hilarious. I don't know what's going on. Usually these cover wars are pretty close, but in this one, Israel is the Grand Slam winner. I picked 7 Israel covers and only 3 USA covers. So for this edition of Cover Wars, give it up for Israel! I want to know what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you think Israel blew the United States out of the water in this Cover Wars? Or do you think the USA did better than what I awarded them? Let me know down in the comments. And while you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel. And once again, a big thank you to Moon Books for putting together this cover battle. Until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.